You think you're choosing between Coca-Cola and Pepsi, Apple and Microsoft, Pfizer and Johnson Johnson. But what if you're not actually choosing between different players, but between different storefronts of the same financial system? What if the main illusion of the 21st century isn't politics, isn't advertising, isn't even the news, but the very idea of free choice itself? Today, I'm going to show you why the modern market looks less and less like competition. Imagine an ordinary day. You walk into a supermarket. Around you, hundreds of brands, thousands of packages, endless shelves. Every label seems to scream, "Choose me." Then you open your phone. You watch the news, order food, pay for a subscription. You discuss with friends which smartphone is better, which bank is more reliable, which brand is more honest. And at that moment, you feel like you're a free person in a free world, that the market revolves around your decisions, that you're voting with your rubles, dollars, euros, and that's how you determine the winners. Now, here's the main question. What if that's not true? What if a significant part of what we call competition is just beautiful decoration? What if behind thousands of logos stand the same centers of capital? And what if modern power no longer looks like a dictator, an army, or a king, but looks like an investment fund, an algorithm, and a board of directors? Today, let's figure out how this system works. No mysticism, just logic, ownership structure, and some very uncomfortable questions. We were taught a simple scheme from childhood. There's a market, there's competition. There are companies fighting each other for our attention. They improve their products, lower prices, create innovations, and in the end, the consumer wins. It sounds beautiful. It sounds logical. It sounds almost like a law of nature. But the problem is that on the storefront we see brands. And real power often lies not at the brand level, but at the capital level. In the 1930s in the US, there were dozens of independent car manufacturers. Almost all of them disappeared, but not because the market crushed them, but because the banks that gave out loans started demanding seats on boards of directors. That's how the modern model was born. The financier doesn't just give money, they enter management. BlackRock and Vanguard didn't invent anything new. They simply took this principle to its absolute extreme. When you start looking not at advertisements but at the lists of largest institutional shareholders, you quickly notice a strange pattern. The same names repeat over and over. BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street. They don't make soda, don't bake bread, don't assemble cars, don't make movies. But they are present in the capital of a huge number of companies that are formally supposed to compete with each other. And at that moment, the world suddenly looks completely different. See how the illusion works. On the surface, Coca-Cola versus Pepsi, Apple versus Microsoft, Disney versus Netflix, Pfizer versus other pharmaceutical giants. People argue, fanboy, fight in the comments, choose their side, defend their favorite brand almost like a football club. But if you go down to the ownership structure level, the picture changes. This doesn't mean all companies are one company. No. They have different managers, different strategies, different products, real conflicts, and real market battles. But it means something else. Above many competing companies, the same large financial players can tower. And that's no small thing. It's a fundamental question about how modern capitalism is structured. Because a multitude of logos does not mean a multitude of centers of power. Let's look at the numbers. U.S. Airlines, Delta, United, American, formerly bitter competitors. The largest shareholder of all three is Vanguard. The second is BlackRock. Banking sector, J.P. Morgan, Citigroup, Bank of America, the same names at the top. Pharmaceuticals, Pfizer, Moderna, Johnson Johnson, again, them. This doesn't mean they're synchronizing prices. It means they will never destroy each other. Because they share a common financial parent. Many people think you can only control a company if you own a controlling stake, 50% plus one share. That's the old intuition. But the modern market is much trickier. The capital of huge corporations is diluted. Shares are distributed among millions of investors. Most of them don't participate in shareholder meetings at all, don't read reports, don't coordinate, don't influence strategy. And against this backdrop, if you have a consolidated stake of 5, 7, or 10%, you are no longer just an investor. You are the largest organized voice in the room. That means you can influence the votes, the composition of the board of directors, corporate standards, strategic priorities, and how the company will behave in the future. So modern power is not always the power of an absolute owner. Very often it is the power of whoever controls the decision-making node. And this is no longer emotion. This is the mathematics of corporate governance. Take a real example. In 2018, Apple had $24.50 billion in free cash. Shareholders demanded it be returned to investors. The largest for votes came from BlackRock and Vanguard. They only had about 6 to 7% each, but the other 80% of shareholders were millions of small holders who didn't even show up to the meeting. As a result, Apple bought back hundreds of billions of dollars of its own shares, which drove up the stock price and enriched precisely BlackRock and Vanguard. They made a profit without investing an extra penny. This is power without a controlling stake. Today, there are three names that come up especially often in conversations about the concentration of financial influence: BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street. They're sometimes called the Big Three. Why are they so important? Because they manage giant volumes of assets, because they're embedded in index funds, pension money, ETFs, institutional portfolios, because a significant portion of modern passive investing flows through them. And passive investing is a whole revolution in itself from recent decades. Before, investors would more often choose specific companies. Today, a huge amount of money simply goes automatically into indexes. And that means into the largest funds that service those indexes. The result, the money of millions of people flows into giant structures. And along with the money, influence flows there too. This is how power in the 21st century stops looking like a throne and starts looking like a fund, a platform, and an asset management system. As of early 2025, BlackRock manages approximately $10 trillion in assets. Vanguard, about $8 trillion. State Street, $4 trillion. That's more than the GDP of Germany, Japan, and the UK combined. And this money doesn't just sit idle. It votes at shareholder meetings. Old power had a face, a king, an emperor, a dictator, a general. You could hate them, you could challenge them, you could overthrow them. New power has a blurred face. Try to imagine a modern center of power. It's not a man on a balcony. It's a table of owners, an investment committee, a risk assessment algorithm, a board of directors, the legal structure, a fund that owns stakes in dozens of other funds and companies. That's why the modern system is so stable. Because fighting one person is easier than fighting a distributed architecture. You can argue with a monarchy. It's harder with an algorithm. A dictator is vulnerable. A system is much less vulnerable. And here a very unpleasant thought appears. Perhaps modern power has become stronger precisely because it has stopped being personal. In the 1970s, the largest shareholders of American corporations were individuals and family offices. Rockefellers, Morgans, Kennedys. Each had their own interests, their own ideology. Today, the largest shareholders are faceless funds. They have no political beliefs, no nationality, no conscience. They have only two imperatives: stability and growth. That's why the modern system is more stable than ever. You cannot negotiate with a fund. You cannot shame a fund. You can only submit to its logic. Now let's move to another important layer, the technological one. When people hear about giant financial systems, they imagine a few tycoons sitting somewhere manually moving markets. In reality, it's much more complex. Modern finance is a world of models, analytics, automated decisions, risk management, and digital infrastructure. One of the most famous systems of this type is BlackRock's Aladdin. There are many myths around it, so it's important to be precise. It's not a planet control button, but it is indeed one of the most powerful risk analysis and investment portfolio management systems in the world. And here's what's truly important. Whoever controls not only money but also the system for assessing risk gains colossal power over the future, because it's through risk that we now determine who is trusted, who gets capital, who is considered stable, and who is considered problematic. BlackRock's Aladdin system doesn't just calculate risks. It ranks companies by management quality. If your company gets a low score, BlackRock votes against your CEO at the shareholder meeting. And if BlackRock doesn't like something, Vanguard and State Street follow suit. In 2022, together they blocked the re-election of several directors at ExxonMobil because they weren't transitioning to green energy fast enough. That decision was made by an algorithm, not a person. None of us know what criteria were used, and you cannot appeal it. The 21st century is not just a battle for resources. It's a battle for the right to determine what is considered safe and what is not. And that is almost power over economic reality itself. The real problem isn't even the funds, it's what happened after 2008. If you're looking for the moment when financial power stepped out of the shadows especially noticeably, one of the key moments is the 2008 crisis. For millions of people, it was a shock. Loss of homes, jobs, savings, confidence in the future. But for large financial structures, the crisis was not only a catastrophe but also a moment of colossal redistribution of influence. When the system is cracking, the state urgently needs someone who can assess toxic assets, understand the scale of the risk, quickly propose rescue tools, and technically execute massive operations. And at that moment, the private giants of the financial world become not just market participants. They become the infrastructure of the system's rescue itself. This is the historical turning point, when the state no longer just regulates the market, but is forced to rely on the largest market players to keep the economy from collapsing. From this moment, the question is no longer who is stronger, the state or corporations, but rather, where does the line between them even exist? Now, the most down-to-earth part, the most everyday, and therefore the most dangerous. Look at how the logic of life is changing. Before, a person sought to own a house, a car, books, music, tools, equipment, software. Today, we are increasingly sold not a thing, but access. Not a car, but a lease. Not a home, but perpetual rent. Not a movie, but a subscription. Not a program, but a monthly payment. Not a device's function, but a license for its temporary use. And this seems convenient, modern, flexible. But there's one problem. Ownership gives autonomy. Access gives dependence. If you own, you are relatively free. If you only rent access, you depend on the terms of the platform, the bank, the service, the contract, and your credit rating. That is, the 21st century person is gradually turning not into an owner, but into a user. And a user is always someone who can have prices raised on them, have features restricted, have service cut off, have rules changed, and be left with only one choice: keep paying. This is no longer just economics. This is a new form of discipline. That's why we hear the term digital feudalism or techno-feudalism more and more often. Yes, these are controversial words, but they resonate because they capture the feeling of the era very accurately. Formally, you are free. In fact, you depend on infrastructure you don't own. You live in rented housing, drive a car on credit, work through platforms, store files on someone else's servers, watch content via subscription, use devices, some of whose functions you don't truly own. And it all works only as long as you pay on time. Did the medieval peasant own the land? No. Does the modern user own the digital environment of their life? Also no. The only difference is aesthetics. Back then, there were castles and coats of arms. Today, apps, data centers, and terms of service agreements. And here it's very important not to slide into primitive conspiracy nonsense. No, this does not mean that somewhere there is a secret club of 5 people manually controlling every purchase on the planet. No, this does not mean that competition doesn't exist at all anymore. No, this does not mean that all companies are the same, but it does mean the following. The modern world is structured so that influence concentrates faster than society notices it. There are many brands. Capital is increasingly centralized. Choice exists. But the architecture of choice increasingly does not belong to you. And that is a serious problem. Not mythical, not fantastical, but institutional. At some point, a convenient structure took shape. Large funds grew because legislation encouraged passive investing. Pension money flowed there because it was safe. Regulators didn't interfere because the market will regulate itself. And then it turned out that the system has no brakes. No one planned the concentration, it just happened. And now it's unprofitable for everyone inside to change it. Even for those who understand the problem. Why is all this important? Because the ownership structure affects not only shareholder profits, it affects which companies survive, which ideas get funding, which industries grow, which media dominate, which standards become the norm, and what the very environment in which we make decisions looks like. In other words, the question of ownership is not only a question of economics, it is a question of freedom. If several giant centers of capital gain the ability to simultaneously influence media, technology, pharma, consumer goods, defense, real estate, and infrastructure, then we are no longer looking at just successful investments. We are looking at a new configuration of power. In the US, concentration of capital is normal. In Europe, it's more complicated. The EU has tried several times to force BlackRock to disclose all its votes on shares. Each time, lobbyists fought back. In China, there is a different model. The state itself owns shares through sovereign funds. There's no illusion of competition between giants. There is direct management. Paradox: in China, you know exactly who makes decisions. In the US, you think it's the market, but behind the market's facade, the same 3 or 4 funds. And now, let's return to where we started. The supermarket, the shelves, thousands of brands, the illusion of infinite choice. The problem is not that choice has completely disappeared. The problem is that we've been trained to look only at the storefront and not at the ownership structure behind that storefront. We argue about brands, but we need to look at shareholders. We argue about tastes, but we need to look at capital flows. We argue about which company is better, but we need to ask who sets the rules of the game for all of them. Because the strongest cage is the one mistaken for freedom. The most convenient form of control is the one sold as a service. And the biggest illusion of the modern world is that a huge number of people are still convinced if there are many products on the shelf, then power is distributed. Not always. Sometimes the diversity on the surface is just a beautiful interface for a highly concentrated system. And perhaps the first step toward freedom today is not shouting, not panic, not another hysterical outburst in the comments, but a cold understanding of who owns the capital, who manages access, and who actually profits from every one of our free choices. If you think this is an exaggeration, great. That means it's time to open up the shareholder structure of the largest companies and see for yourself. So write in the comments, do you think we still live in market competition, or already in a system where there are many brands but fewer and fewer centers of influence? Thank you for your attention. And remember, the truth is on the surface. Many just don't want to see it.